Order, order. I call Joe Morris to move the motion.
Thank you. This House has considered the future of sheep farming, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Dr. Huck. The future of our sheep farming sector is one that is absolutely vital to my constituency, to my constituents in Northumberland, and Northumberland is famous, after all, for having more sheep in it than people. I was privileged in the run-up to and during the recent general election to meet with local farmers in my constituency, including at events that play an important role for our rural communities, such as the Northumberland County Show, and to discuss the future of their industry. I've been delighted since the election to attend the Allendale Agricultural Show and the Staley Show as the sitting MP, because this fundamentally isn't just a debate about sheep farming. It's a debate about our upland farms, about the communities that have grown up around them, the land that's been tended to by those communities for centuries. Farmers I've spoken to have expressed their concerns about how a hierarchy of land use is being pushed for in some quarters, a hierarchy that doesn't place enough importance of the public good that using land for food production has. I've been told of farms being bought up by companies who are simply chasing up subsidies. It's led to perfectly farmable land being taken away to allow opportunistic companies to line their own pockets and to launder their reputations. Farmers I've spoken to acknowledge that in many cases change is needed with regard to biodiversity, but this change shouldn't be about absolutes. Rewilding and active farming can go hand in hand with one another, and it doesn't have to take out large swathes of land from food production. The way in which much of this land is managed is a centuries-old process. Now, unsurprisingly, as England's largest constituency, the land on which sheep graze in the Hexham constituency encompasses a diverse landscape, from our border with County Durham, our border with Cumbria into Newcastle, all across up to the Scottish border, and across sites like Hadrian's Wall, the site of the much-missed Sycamore Gap tree. Now, before I move any further, I want to specifically thank the farmers across my constituency who've engaged with me. When I was first selected on an October evening in 2023 as Labour's candidate for the constituency at a meeting at Hexham Farmers Mart, I knew that winning the trust of the farming community would not be easy, but it was fundamental to winning the seat and to being the best constituency MP it was possible to be. Now, the farming communities in my part of the country told me that they felt let down and taken for granted by the last government. And as I'll cover later, they told me of the betrayal by the previous government and how they'd been left to face down the result of extremely damaging trade deals. Now, the election of this new government is, Dr. Huck, an opportunity to reset the relationship between sheep farmers, the wider farming community and the government. I will.
And welcome him to the House and also praise him on making a great speech on an important topic as the MP for England's second largest constituency. I want to talk though, you mentioned upland farmers, and obviously sheep farming is huge in the uplands that we both share and love. 41% of upland farmers are tenants. Would you agree with me that the Rock Review, which happened during the last Parliament, and where Baroness Rock proposed there being a tenant farmers commissioner to make sure there's fairness for tenants in this time of flux and change, is something the new government should adopt and do so very quickly to protect our tenants against the potential poor decisions, dangerous decisions that some landlords can make?
Thank him for his intervention. I'll come on to tenant farmers later on in my speech, and I hope that he'll like some of what he hears. The election of the Labour government, as I was saying, is an opportunity to reset the relationship between sheep farmers, between the wider farming community and this government. Now, the farmers I've spoken to are aware that this is our chance to have an honest and productive relationship built on trust and with the long-term viability of the agricultural industry and communities in this country at its heart. I'd also like to thank members of my local farming community in particular, particularly Robert Phillipson and Nick Howard, both sheep farmers in the Allen Valleys, who have been straightforward, who have been patient, and who have taken their time to aid me in representing them as best I can and to stand up for them and their colleagues. Now, for many of those communities, I know that engaging with the Labour Party is new and challenging and not something that perhaps came naturally, something perhaps was difficult for many of my local members to believe that we would go out into farming communities and we would be brave enough to walk down those paths and to try and win those votes. I'd also like to thank the Northumberland NFU and Catherine Bowman, who've been great at facilitating that dialogue, and I'm determined that I'll continue to do that every single day and every single week. I know through that dialogue we're not always going to agree, and that many of the conversations are going to be difficult and robust, but we all know how sheep farming is for our constituents, and that this relationship is one in which trust is earned, not given. As we're discussing the future of sheep farming, it's important to talk about the next and the emerging generation of sheep farmers. They'll be the custodians of our beautiful countryside and ensure that the industry is able to face the challenges and reality that sheep farming has to be as a priority moving forward. Recently, I visited West Walmley Farm just outside of Hexham Town, and I was hosted by James Johnson and joined by other livestock farmers. James's family are fifth-generation tenants and as such have an impressive understanding of their industry and the land they farm. James's brother Stuart took the family down the path of a more conscious relationship with how they manage their soil and began to use regenerative methods of agriculture in order to be both a more resilient business economically and environmentally. The methods that Stuart is undertaking have allowed him to slash his use of pesticides and fertiliser, reducing their livestock vet and med, and their practices have improved their biodiversity and led to Stuart being named Soil Farmer of the Year in 2023. I believe that government has a role to play in supporting families like the Johnsons as they venture into new ways of managing their land and livestock, but also a role to play in promoting and demonstrating these methods to the wider livestock farming industry and supporting their implementation. Government should be an active participant in this conversation and helping more livestock farmers to explore how these practices could allow them to become more resilient businesses, but also more resilient in terms of the environment. And on tenant farmers in particular, many of my constituents are tenanted. I think it's incredibly important that the government listen to their concerns, that they look at the ROC review carefully and look at what is implementable. I'm aware of the strained circumstances we find ourselves in, and I'm aware that not everything will be able to be done straight away. But I think those tenant farmers have suffered a great deal from spiking energy bills, spiking food costs, and a simple inability often to make farm financing work. It's really come through, whether I was in West Woodburn, Slaley, Allendale. It's something that came through in almost every conversation I had.
Will he give way?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Let's do it first.
Thank you, Dr. Huck, and thank you to my honourable friend for allowing me to give way. In my constituency of Monmouthshire and in Wales as a whole, we absolutely cannot underestimate the value that sheep farmers bring to our local economy and to, for example, the importance of our local livestock mart, where farmers, young and old of all generations, gather each week to not only sell their fabulous livestock, but also come together to socialise and to access services, and which can really help their mental health. So does my honourable friend agree that we must look again at the UK-Australia Free Trade Agreement and the UK-New Zealand Trade Agreement, because we have a really big issue with New Zealand lamb. In my constituency this weekend, in the local butcher, I checked, you can buy a leg of good Welsh lamb for £46.14, but you can buy a leg of New Zealand lamb in the supermarket for £20. So does my honourable friend agree we must see some action to ensure that our farmers in Monmouthshire, across Wales, are protected against the flood of imports from overseas?
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. As we were discussing before the debate started, I spent 2 years working for the UK steel sector, another sector that faces dramatic challenges with goods produced at far lower costs, flooding into our markets and damaging production. I think that those issues that affect steel affect farming, and it's really incumbent that we look at the trade deals that we sign, how they impact upon us. And I will come on to later in my speech, I'm sure that many others will join me in urging the government to look at how trade deals are negotiated and how we can add more sunlight to that process. As I think all of us share a disappointment that I know that the former DEFRA Secretary shared with his assessment of the Australia deal as a failure for UK farmers in particular. Now, during my visit to West Walmley Farm, I was told about the struggles that we faced this year in particular, about high rainfall, how that had affected sheep farmers, with this year's lambing system being particularly traumatic, and farmers telling about the high losses they'd faced due to persistent rain and cold conditions. The impacts that had on farmers have been immense, with high rainfall continuing to impact harvesting and sowing of next year's crops, so impacting the overall ability of farmers to operate as a business, and particularly affecting the ability to get silage and hay. As I've been saying about Australia and New Zealand, these deals were signed, they let down rural communities were shut out of that process and ultimately damaged by a government that had claimed to be on their side and, in my view, gaslit a lot of those farmers with some of the communications around it. And I hope that as we're discussing trading deals trade deals. We consider how those deals are discussed. We maintain the ability to feed ourselves as a nation. Prioritising food security does not simply mean signing any trade deal that we possibly can. My constituents, when those trade deals are signed, food security is not the only thing on the chopping block, it's their economic security as well. I will happily.
Thank you so much. Perhaps I should say that I'm a tenant farmer myself, so I'm very aware of the issues that you're bringing to the table here today, and I'm really delighted to be here to support. And can I also agree with my honourable friend from Monmouth? We are so fortunate in Wales to have so many excellent sheep farmers throughout the whole of Wales. But I've got two issues that I'd like to bring up, if that's okay. The last government, we know, failed to pass the much-needed legislation on sheep worrying. And yet it is unclear what plans the new Labour government have for tackling this problem. And does the member agree with me that it is important that the new UK government should set out its position to commit to introduce legislation to tackle sheep worrying, which causes so much financial and mental hardship for farming families? And can I also note that sheep farming in upland Wales has faced a 33% decrease in income over the past year. And that is really unsustainable. So we need to do everything we can, and that includes tackling sheep worrying in order that our farms are viable, or as viable as they can possibly be. Diolch.
I thank her for her intervention. She makes a very valid point, and it brought me back to a conversation I had up near Burness in my constituency around rural crime, and one of my local farmers saying to me that she had criminals coming out. She was expecting 45, 50-minute waits for police to even get out. And I think ultimately, I hope the government will look carefully at sheep worrying as part of a broader rural crime strategy. And I look forward to the Minister's answer on that. On trade deals, I do hope that we look at the lack of basic oversight and scrutiny of our trade negotiation processes. Ultimately, I know that is not the Minister's responsibility, but I do hope that he will energetically lobby his colleagues at the Department for Business and Trade to make sure that those decisions are made, with the security of our farmers in mind. I also spoke with farmers who were consistently worried about rising input costs, the rising cost of energy, the rising rate of inflation biting away at their takings, and more than most, those farmers have been hit by the chaos inflicted on the country by that mini budget and by the previous 14 years. They had seen their income drop. They had seen the playing field rigged in favour of producers from other countries that did not have to face the same welfare and production standards that they did, and they'd also seen big business able to continually whittle away small farmers and able to continually. I will finish my sentence and then I will, if that's okay. They'd seen larger businesses be able to continually try and dictate the terms to tenant farmers when it came to selling their processes, and I will happily give way.
Give way, and I remind the House of my entry in the Register of Members' Interests as an owner and operator of farmland on Isla. It's this question, though, of the imbalance between the small operators, which is predominantly the people that you have in the sheep sector, and the bigger players. One of the things that you can, or the public sector can do to add a bit of value would be to support the reconstruction of a network of local abattoirs, because that's something where genuinely there is an opportunity to put meaningful support that would go directly to the small farmers and the small units that he's talking about.
I thank him for his intervention, and I agree that for a lot of farmers that are small operators, they've expressed their frustration to me that people assume that the majority of farmers are incredibly wealthy, incredibly well off, and able to shoulder a lot of these burdens. And I'm reminded of the current Leader of the Opposition saying to the NFU conference that a lot of farmers didn't do it for the money. Forgive me if that's not a direct quote. But it was brought up to me at an NFU organised roundtable during the election campaign, and was a source of very genuine anger at that. Now, speaking a little bit more about my constituency, in Northumberland, we're proud to be the home, and I do apologise to Scottish colleagues, of one of the oldest tartans in the world, which is Northumberland tartan, woven from, of course, Northumbrian wool. It's not simply pride I raise out of my constituency, but the fact that we're not just talking about food production here, we're also talking about a potential staple of clothing production. I was told by my staff that despite my football leanings, that it was Northumberland tartan that inspired Newcastle United's home kit. I should put on the record that my football allegiances lie with Sunderland, and I've yet to find a tartan that inspired theirs. But ultimately, I would like to encourage everyone to support local producers, contribute to showing that pride in their community, and to avoid, to purchasing home-produced clothing where possible, rather than chucking your money away onto fast fashion from the likes of Temu, Boohoo, or ASOS. Ultimately, my county didn't just mine coal; we worked gold. And as one of the farmers has said to me, if you took farms out of the Hexham constituency, it would be a disaster for our area. It would simply chip away at the foundation of our economy, but also it would destroy the quintessential nature of much of Northumberland. And as we consider the future of sheep farming and of upland farming in general across the country, I urge the Minister to embrace this new relationship, to embrace the fact that on our side of the House, so many colleagues have been returned by constituencies with huge agricultural footprints, and to engender a relationship with those communities based on mutual respect. I consider myself an environmentalist. It was the climate movement that drew me into politics, but I don't see any tension between a planet that can survive, improvements in biodiversity, and futures being secured for generations to come, and a future being secured for our farming communities and a nation that is able to feed itself. I do hope that the Minister can comment on his plans to work with the Business and Trade Department for reform of the Groceries Code adjudicator, so that my farmers can be reassured that this government stands on the side of producers as well as consumers, and that he can comment on what I hope will be a respectful and open dialogue, in particular with regard to the upland farmers who feel that the system is so weighted against them when it comes to the Byzantine regulations created by the previous government regarding post-Brexit subsidy arrangements. One of the farmers I recently met with said that it managed to create a lot of jobs in navigating those arrangements rather than getting the money where it needs to be. So thank you very much.
Sheep farming. Can I remind members that if you wish to make a speech, can you bob so that we have an idea of how to divide up the time? Okay. All right. In that case, I call Jim Shannon.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's not often I get called first, first after the introductory, but thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's a real pleasure to serve on your chairship. And also, can I commend the honourable gentleman for Hexham for setting the scene so very well. I did the adjournment debate with him last night. We're now doing Westminster Hall together, so we're on a roll here, so we are. So I wish him well. I wish him well, very much so. As many will be aware, well, those who have known me for a longer time, and those perhaps who are new, I represent a fairly rural constituency where farming is a massive contributor to our local economy. I live in a farm down the Ards Peninsula at Grey Abbey, and I've been steeped in agriculture activities over mostly all of my life. So I understand the pressures and the challenges that our farming industry, but also our local farmers face. So it's a pleasure, Madam Chair, to be here to speak on this issue and to give the Northern Ireland perspective. I see the Minister in his place, and I'm so pleased to see him there. Well done. And I look forward to him being able to respond to our questions as much as he can, ever mindful that farming is a devolved matter. But part of my theme will be how we can do it together across this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I declare an interest, Madam Chair, as a member of the Ulster Farmers Union. I was at one time, in a very small way, a hobby farmer of sheep. I enjoyed it, but then the workload became so great with other activities it was impossible to look after the sheep, so I sold them to my neighbour up the road. But I do have fond memories of the lambing times when they come round and helping all those ewes to be able to lamb with the assistance of ourselves. Sheep farming is a significant part of the UK agriculture sector, shaping both landscapes and rural economies in the four regions of the United Kingdom. There's some 31.8 million sheep in the UK, down from a recent peak of 34.8 in 2017. I think that's why this debate is so important. There has been a decrease in many sectors, and sheep is one of them. Sheep are predominantly, but not exclusively, found in the north and the west of the United Kingdom. Just to give some figures in Northern Ireland's perspective, if I can specifically, the value of output from sheep decreased by 0.5% to 109 million in 2023, and the total Number of sheep slaughtered increased by 4% in 2023, whereas the average carcass weight decreased by 2% to 22 kilograms. I have to say I owe all these stats and thank the Ulster Farmers Union for making them available. Volume of sheep meat produced increased some 2% in 2023, and in the 2023 sheep census there were approximately 2 million sheep in Northern Ireland, including almost 1 million breeding ewes. 38% of farmers in Northern Ireland, 38%, that's quite a large number, have sheep, and the value of the sheep industry output in 2022 was 106 million. So it plays a critical, important part in the farming community that I live in, and in particular in the Irish Peninsula. For Strangford specifically, Madam Chair, we have numerous sheep farmers who farm sheep, both for meat and for the wool as well, although the wool has not been making much of a price over the last few years, but it's all a part of the revenue, be it small or whatever, when it comes to that. In rural villages like Carrador, like Ballywalter, like Grey Abbey, where I live, Kirkcudbright and Portaferry, and across all of the peninsula, and indeed across the Ards and further out towards Cumber and Ballygowan, and the new constituency, which takes in more of South Down, down as far as the Coyle Bridge and down Paddock. Again, numerous sheep farmers there as well. There are countless farmers contributing to the local agricultural economy, and farming is a huge aspect of the local economy of Strangford, of my constituency, with our sheep and lamb farmers providing high quality meat to subsidiaries for retail purposes. Numerous local shops, farm shops, such as McKee's in Newton Ards and Harson's and Grey Abbey, provide farm-to-fork service, showcasing the locality of local restaurants. Now, if we can do the farm-to-fork, you can get all the revenue from the breeding of the lambs to the sale of them and ultimately to the eating of them. So for those business, McKee's and Harson's, is quite productive. The United Kingdom imports sheep products under new free trade agreements since we exited the EU. The Honourable Lady in her intervention just there mentioned about the price of a lamb, a leg of lamb from here and from New Zealand. These include the tariff concessions for a range of products such as lamb meat. In addition, government has set out its priorities for England in the Environmental Improvement Plan of 2023, including necessity for more environmentally friendly farming to help achieve further targets. Whilst it is appreciated, and I say that, and Madam Chair, you know that farming is devolved, there is, I believe, a responsibility for the UK government, for our minister here, to ensure that the United Kingdom, as a collective, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, has a joint policy on promoting sheep farming and protecting our family industry through future trade deals. The Honourable Gentleman referred to the trade deals, the Honourable Lady in intervention, and my colleague and friend to my left-hand side also referred to the trade deals as well. They have an effect upon our farming back home, and they have an effect on the farmers in my constituency of Strangford. There are environmental factors that will ultimately impact the future of farming, and steps must be taken to protect our sheep numbers through adequate funding. I know we often come asking for funding, but the fact is they're such an integral part of my constituency and indeed of Northern Ireland. I think I said it was £106 million. It was a contribution to the economy, quite significant, can't be ignored. And all what sometimes we don't see is the jobs of those who are involved and how many are, and the families that live on that as well. Now, my two friends and colleagues from Northern Ireland, for North Antrim and indeed for South Antrim, will speak and give a perspective of the North. We're going to have the three contributions from Northern Ireland, and we all will be saying the same thing, the importance of it. But I want to make the point is we're here to represent our constituents. The Ulster Farmers Union have called for a sheep scheme in Northern Ireland to help improve the welfare of sheep and help increase the sustainability of the sheep businesses. The Ulster Farmers Union, along with the Northern Ireland Sheep Industry Task Force, will continue to lobby for a sheep scheme. And I therefore urge the government to engage with officials from DAERA back home, including the Minister Andrew Muir, for the long-term sustainability of the Northern Ireland sheep industry. It might be helpful, Minister, if you're able to. If you're not able to today, I understand that, but if you could maybe perhaps come back to us and let us know what discussions you have had with the Minister in place. I understand you have met him and probably more than one occasion. So it'd be interesting to hear what those discussions have been and what it means. To conclude, Madam Chair, our farming sector is such an important aspect of our economic success. I suppose that whether it be, in this case, it's lamb and sheep, but also it's about the dairy, it's about the beef, it's about the poultry, it's about the cereals. They're all part of that massive, almost a jigsaw. It brings all those things together, which contributes to the economy. This is an integral part of that, and today we're debating that issue. So we do, I believe, must do more to promote and expand it. I look forward to seeing the plans that the Minister and our Labour government must do, and I have hope that the devolved institutions can play a significant role in our agricultural success. I mentioned to the Minister, he told me one day he'd been in Northern Ireland, in my constituency. I had not been there, Madam Chair, because I was unable to be there. But I told him, that was before he was elected as a Minister, I said, Minister, you were here this time, that was back before the election, and you were asking questions. The next time you come back, you'll have to answer them. Today, Minister, the questions have to be answered. Thank you.
We keep to within 7.5 minutes each. Everyone gets in. David Smith.
Thank you, Dr. Hart. It's a great pleasure to be able to make a contribution to this debate, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Hexham, for securing this Westminster Hall debate, and also for a really knowledgeable and thoughtful and heartfelt speech, and some great contributions from other honourable members as well. I'd like to note that we've heard from the member from the largest constituency in England, the second largest, and now the third largest constituency in England. Like in his constituency of Hexham, farming played a vital role in the community life, the economy, the past and the future of North Northumberland. The very landscape that we view as quintessentially British has been shaped by farming, and especially sheep farming. And so it's integral to our vision for how Northumberland, and North Northumberland for myself, and the country as a whole can be. We've around 2,000 farm holdings across Northumberland, and we're a proud and productive farming county with great produce and excellent conditions for growing and rearing. Recently, I met a farmer in my constituency from the Coquet Valley who farms both sheep and cattle, and he said to me, if you could choose to farm anywhere in the world at the moment, it would be in Northumberland. And I can't agree more with that. Indeed, the world record for wheat production, if we're thinking more broadly, by yield is currently held by a farm in my constituency near Bamborough. So there are great conditions. And this suitability for farming in North Northumberland is also true of sheep farming in particular, with the climate and topography lending themselves well to sheep farming, especially hill farming, which we've heard about already. And DEFRA estimate that there are approximately 457,000 sheep in North Northumberland, sheep and lambs, I should say, being raised in my constituency. That's 3% of the national total. Oh, yeah, okay. In terms of trade, we've touched on that. And the UK is the world's 6th largest lamb producer and 3rd largest exporter. And whilst Brexit and some recent trade deals by the last government have brought new challenges, as raised by the honourable member for Monmouthshire, export of sheep and lambs must be part of the sector's future. So this world-class produce by quantity and quality is immense in North Northumberland and around the country. Now, we've also said that food security is national security. And in the world in which we currently live, the United Kingdom must be as self-sufficient as we possibly can for the staples of life, and therefore the produce as much of our food chain as possible in Britain. That's not just good for our food security and our health, but also for efforts to tackle climate change. And in fact, sheep farming in particular has a strong cyclical benefit with regard to recycling carbon emissions. So the question is, how do we ensure that farming, and sheep farming in particular, is flourishing into the future? And I'd just like to suggest a few points that I've heard from speaking to farmers, especially tenant farmers in the Cheviot Hills and the Coquet Valley and all round North Northumberland. And I don't claim in any way to be an expert in this subject, but I've tried to listen to my constituents and to present their points here. The first point that I would make is that we need to encourage younger people, the farmers of the future, into sheep farming. That came across loud and clear from the constituents, the farmers that I've been speaking to. That's been a common theme. There's a fear that the intergenerational link is being lost. And that's harder than ever to see where the next generation of farmers, especially sheep farmers, are coming. And there are many reasons for that. However, they certainly include the difficulty of the work for relatively modest financial gain, as we've discussed. There's a growing distance from many in our society from the land and a knowledge of the land. And there's a lack, perhaps, of broad agricultural education, whether that be mainstream education or even in some sector-specific agricultural colleges. And finally, there's the difficulty that many young farmers face in securing a tenancy. Access to land is a real issue. So I therefore ask, what can we do and what can the government do to do more in our education system to give young people a taste of the land and a taste of farming and draw them into that connection to the land. Second point I'd quickly make is that with sheep farming being a really good entry point into the broader world of farming, that given its relatively low initial capital costs, access to land, as I've just mentioned, and the affordability of tenancies is a key barrier. So I'd ask the government to consider how the sustainable farming incentive can actually be used to sustain farming itself. Is there a way that SFI or other government funding could be used as long-term loan finance, for example, that will enable more entry-level farmers to get into sheep farming, but with a portion of the risk shared? Could tax incentives be given to landowners in order to incentivise them to let land at more affordable rates? I think we need to think about how we can help to see an increase in access to land, maybe what we might call starter farms. The third point and penultimate point for me is that we need to make rapid progress on the overall funding subsidy settlement for British farming. I'm regularly being told by my constituents that the uncertainty around the successor to CAP and the basic payment scheme for the next few years up to 2027 and beyond is making it difficult for many of our farmers to plan in the medium to long term. That's particularly true, I think we have to recognise, for sheep farming. And so for the government to bring clarity to the future of farming subsidy is particularly key. Notwithstanding the strained state of the public finances, overall I'd urge the government to commit to at least the current £2.4 billion funding for farming for the duration of the Parliament. And fourthly and finally, I'd just like to say it'll be so important to get the calibration correct within SFI when it comes to the balancing of environmental subsidy and subsidy for food production. At present, I'm being told that the scheme is seeming to make it much more financially attractive for farmers to take good quality land out of production, for instance, in order to rewild or plant forestry or prioritise soil and nutrient management. And those are worthy and important aims, and aims that I support. However, we need to ensure that we're choosing the correct land for these purposes so that we can maintain adequate food production. A land use framework can't come soon enough. And I really truly believe that there are Venn diagrams where all of these worthy enterprises come together. That it's not necessarily a zero-sum game. So, however we plead on all of these issues, I'm sure that all honourable members contributing to this debate can agree that sheep farming has a rich and important contribution to British farming and British society, and we must do all we can to secure a flourishing future for it.
Thank you very much, Chair. I thank the member for Wrexham for bringing this important topic, I think, to this Westminster Hall debate. And I think, as my honourable friend from Strangford has already indicated about the Northern Ireland interest in this subject and the fact that, at a rough calculation, I think 20% of the contributors are actually here from Northern Ireland to pay part in this topic, because we do value the input for our agricultural sector and our farmer sector, not just in Northern Ireland, but across the United Kingdom. But I do, before moving on to the substantive subject of this debate, I just want to pick up on a topic that the previous speaker referenced, and that was about the next generation of our farmers. As a past president of the Young Farmers Clubs of Ulster, that's been a challenge, I think, across all farming sectors, across all parts of these United Kingdoms, and even further afield, about how we make sure those promotions are there, those opportunities are there, to make sure that the next generation of farmers actually have opportunity, not just to take over ownership of a farm or follow on a family tradition, but actually enter a profitable, future-proofed industry and basis where they're actually supported by the government here, but also the government back home in Northern Ireland, as the member Strangford pointed out, agriculture being a devolved issue in regards to that. So I know our government back home have looked at a number of schemes, new entrant schemes, in regards to those various supports that there are out there, because unlike England, Wales and most of Scotland, it's not tenancies that we have the challenge with, but it's actually passing of land from one generation to the next, and the challenges that come there through inheritance tax and all those other additional problems as well. So there are commonalities and I think solutions that this government can bring as well. My colleague from Strangford obviously got the same briefing that I did from the Ulster Farmers Union in regards to numbers, in regards to our sheep industry. Just short of 1 million breeding ewes, over 2 million sheep, so we actually do have more sheep in Northern Ireland than people, so that has been a proven statistic in this debate today. 9,669 sheep farmers currently registered in regards to that, and as has already been referenced, £109 million contribution to our economy. But I think what is glaring, and I think what needs highlighted here in this place as well, so when we establish the importance and the contribution of our sheep sector back home, our Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs current future agricultural policy doesn't actually mention sheep at all. So I think it's important that there's a message actually comes from the debate and the contributions here today that actually realises that and gets that message back home to our minister back home as well. And that's why again, a sheep task force was established back in 2022, representing members from the Ulster Farmers Union, Ulster Wool, National Sheep Association, NIAPA, LMC and NIMEA, and they actually took it upon themselves to establish a task force with a number of key aims, targets. At that point, where once again we were without an executive in Northern Ireland and without an agriculture minister actually to support our farmers and our industry. So that sheep task force has produced a robust evidence-based report and actually highlights the stimulus programmes and opportunities that they're there for the vision and the future of our sheep sector. And that's the task that they have taken on themselves, and actually set themselves quite a strategic vision, Chair, and that they see a vision for the Northern Ireland sheep industry of actually being a resilient, vibrant and sustainable industry that uses leading-edge technologies to deliver safe, high-quality meat and wool through increased productivity while adding value by increasing carbon sequestration, reducing greenhouse gas intensity and enhancing landscape biodiversity while maintaining the mosaic landscape of our hills and uplands and securing social cohesion. So I think that is actually all those topics that have been raised, not just by the mover of this motion, but all the contributors who have actually spoken here today. But there are, again, those specific challenges to our Northern Ireland sheep sector that are, I suppose, not replicated across the rest of this United Kingdom, but that's something that the Minister and his government can play part of. We are currently, in our agriculture industry and the industry, our veterinary industry, is actually seeing major challenges through the future-proofing of the supply of veterinary medicines into Northern Ireland because of the protocol. And that is something that has been raised not just by the Farmers Union, by farmers, but also by the British Veterinary Association in regards to their contributions as well. So when we, and anyone around here who has farmed sheep and worked with sheep, know the importance of regular dosing, fluke-out, worm and all the rest of it. So the access to those medicines, those veterinary products, is crucial to the sustainability and the future-proofing, not just of our sheep sector, but also for agriculture sector in Northern Ireland in general as well. And I think, Minister, something else that possibly in your remit as well is actually about that ability to move livestock, sheep I know being the topic today, but also cattle, between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the additional, I suppose, bureaucracy and challenges that our current farmers are facing in regards to being able to move those pedigree animals back and forth between not just sales, but shows as well. And I do know, to step outside, I have a constituent who is actually present today, was present for PMQs, he's here in this debate, and raised a very important issue. He is actually pedigree cattle in Scotland at this minute in time, which he hasn't been able to bring home to Northern Ireland since October due to blue tongue and the restrictions that have applied there about moving livestock, even within this United Kingdom, due to that restriction. So I think, Minister, if you can, have a look at that, and possibly if there's something that can be done in regards to that as well. So, not to finish, I think, on the challenges or the negatives that are here, I think from the contributions here that have already been made and will be made, I think we do have to look to the potential and the future-proofing of our agricultural sector here in the United Kingdom, because it's what this country was built on, it's what this country is based on, and it's what we're good at in regards to producing that good quality food that we should be able to look towards actually being that safe, sustainable food supply for the people of the United Kingdom. And I thank the member for moving this motion and look forward to the Minister's response.
The chairmanship, and I commend the member for Hexham for staging this debate, herding us in. And as we are gathered here today, there's some 4,500 sheep and lambs will be sold at a community-owned and run Lewis and Harris auction mark in Stanish, outside Stornoway in my constituency in the Hill and Year. Now, these sheep will end up with finishers across the UK. They represent the culmination of a year's work for crofters in Lewis. And they represent that deep connection that you see here today between the Hebrides and Scotland and Wales and England and Northern Ireland, probably best symbolised in this place by the wool sack, which the Lord Speaker sits on in the other house. Now, wool and sheep aren't worth as much as they used to, and I won't give you live market prices, but I know that with the main store lamb sale season in full swing, prices are up. In Stornoway, prices were up to £11. Dingwall, where Lewis lambs are sold, £6.85. Lochboy sale prices were up £12, and it's unfortunate that corresponding lamb sale in Lochmaddy in North Uist has not gone ahead this year, but hopefully may be restored. But I think that shows the economic and cultural importance of sheep to my constituency in the Outer Hebrides. Sheep have and will continue to play a great role in keeping communities alive. I come from a crofting community. I grew up on a croft, rearing, shearing, sending out to the moor to our common grazing and overwintering and feeding sheep. And ironically, these common grazing lands, which we don't use so much for sheep now, house wind turbines, which bring in community profit to the tenant crofters in our area. So the crofting communities are in good shape, and are in good shape because of sheep. Crofting is best described as small tenant farming. These small tenant farmers have held together communities, towns and villages, language and culture across the whole northwest of Scotland and the islands. And the backbone of crofting, of course, is sheep. But the sheep alone won't support us. The industry needs accessible and proportionate support, and it's necessary to continue that future. A recent in-depth report highlighted the importance of crofting and agriculture to island economies, and it reveals the extent of the decline in sheep farming in the Western Isles in the last 20 years. Sheep numbers in the Outer Hebrides have decreased by 52% in the last 20 years, down from nearly 300,000 to 143,000 in 2021. Indeed.
It's really interesting for me when we're talking about crofting and tenant farmers. And as the other speakers noted, when you're talking about access to land, there's such an issue with the farm business tenancies at the moment that at the maximum that's being offered is 10 years, and the average can be as little as 5 to 7 years. Most tenant farmers work as well as keeping their holdings, as you know, and long term, and because of the incomes involved, this is really unsustainable. And we need an understanding and legislation, I think, which secures tenancies long term and offers our young farmers, as you were talking about the YFC movement and young farmers, security when they're starting their farming careers. We're not having that at the moment with the current farm business tenancies. We need to look at that as legislation from this House, please.
Not everyone's aware. We shouldn't use the word you. You means me, because I'm in the chair, and definitely... Anyway, just general reminder for all. Talk your criteria.
Forgive me if I made that error, and
I appreciate what the member says about farm tenancies, and we have the 19th century land radicals and activists who fought the Crofters' War, and this place for the 1886 Crofting Act to thank for giving us secure, heritable tenancies in crofting, which play an important part in maintaining families and people on the land. And as I was explaining, sheep numbers have fallen in the Western Isles by 52% in the last 20 years. I knew I was in the middle of a depopulation crisis, but I didn't know it included the sheep stocks as well. And that fall in numbers can be explained in part by the decoupling of support from headage payments to area-based ones. It's a policy that's had a significant impact on agriculture in our areas, because in real terms, agricultural support payments have decreased by 20% between 2014 and 22. That's despite policies that say they're increasing support. Inflation has eroded their value. Now, I know that the Minister will be aware that most crofting and agricultural and environmental policy is devolved, but I think it's important to make the point that the Scottish Crofters Federation themselves have made, that in the Scottish Government's recent agricultural bill was a missed opportunity, 10 years in the making, and a chance to move to redistribute support towards smaller producers is not a mistake that this new government ought to repeat, and we ought to learn the lessons of that missed opportunity. And this research, which showed the decline in sheep numbers, covered Orkney, Shetland and the Western Isles, and it also showed that despite that, 21% of the working age population are involved in agriculture in the Outer Hebrides, and that shows that crofting and sheep farming still have a lively and rigorous part of our economy. And the member for Hexham mentioned rewilding and the balance between agriculture and the environment. And whenever I hear the term rewilding or read any correspondence about rewilding, I always search the address and suggest the wolves be released at that postcode first before being released in our constituencies. But there is a balance to be had. 31% of the land area in the Outer Hebrides is of ecological significance, and much of that land is managed by crofters. And the balance can be made. Crofters have and already do manage their environment well and have done for generations. We don't have to choose between sheep and peat. Both can coexist, and crofters can restore these habitats while still producing high-quality livestock. And the member for North Northumberland mentioned the future, and the future, of course, is in the next generation, in youth. And I'm glad to report that that same auction, Martin Strange, which is holding its sales today, also hosted an event for young crofters early in the summer, at which over 200 young people attended, giving it the accolade of being the hottest dating agency in the Western Isles. But it shows there is a huge demand there for people to get involved in agriculture and for people to get involved in the land and managing the land well, and rearing sheep and sheep husbandry, because although I produce figures about lamb sales and meat production, looking after sheep really is husbandry, and that cycle of life that people are involved in the countryside. And once again, I commend the member for Hexham for bringing this issue to the fore and allowing us to highlight the situation in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the member for Hexham for bringing this important matter to the floor. As has been clear from the contributions from Northern Ireland, sheep farming is a significant, but sadly the poor relation of farming, because in the farming sector, the lowest farm incomes arise from sheep farmers. And that is an indication in itself of an indisputable fact that what is needed in Northern Ireland, and particularly for a constituency like mine, North Antrim, which has a lot of sheep farmers, what is needed is a sheep support scheme. Now, in Northern Ireland, we do have a beef support scheme. It's called the Beef Carbon Reduction Scheme. We have a suckler cow scheme, and all those contribute to environmental enhancements on what used to be the single farm payment, now the direct payment. But there is no scheme for sheep farmers. And that is a lamentable failure of the local department. They've been sitting on a task force recommendation since early last year and have failed to move on that matter. And not only is it failure to move, not doing anything to increase, but it's going to bring about a decrease in income, because from 2025, sheep farmers who are sheep farming only are set to lose 17% of their basic payment scheme unless they change to include protein crops and cattle. And for many of them, that's not just possible. So there's an urgent need for action.
Member give way.
Yes?
I'm sure the member's also aware when he talks about our sheep farmers in Northern Ireland looking enviously on at the beef farmers, all the rest of it in Northern Ireland. They also get to look across the border where the Republic of Ireland government has actually introduced a sheep support scheme which is paying up to 17 to 20 euros per head, which is actually putting our farmers in Northern Ireland at a further disadvantage.
Well, I'm grateful, but it's actually worse than that. Because yes, we can look across the border and see the advantage, but the problem for Northern Ireland farmers is, courtesy of the Windsor Framework and Protocol, that we are subject to the same rules and regulations, but none of the benefits under the protocol. Because, never forget this, farming in Northern Ireland, the laws are not made in this place. They're not made in Stormont. They're made in a foreign parliament to which we elect no one. And that is the ultimate constitutional absurdity of the Windsor Framework, that we've created a situation where over 300 areas of law in Northern Ireland, the laws are foreign imposed, colony-like on Northern Ireland. And the whole agri-food industry, those laws are made in Brussels. And that is an appalling constitutional and economic affront. And because we're subject to the European veterinary regime, we now have this looming crisis that come 2025, our veterinary medicines, which are produced in Great Britain, will not be permitted to enter Northern Ireland, and up to 50% of our medicines are going to be excluded from Northern Ireland. That is a serious challenge, which the last government did nothing about, and which this government, I trust, will do something about. And it's going to take this government to stand up with vigour against the European Commission and to insist that any part of this country must be entitled to have the same veterinary medicines as the rest of this country. And it's time that we shook off those shackles and insisted on that. And of course it gets even worse, because it's already been alluded to. We now have a situation where to move livestock from Great Britain to Northern Ireland is subject to every EU rule that applies. And therefore we have quarantine periods of 6 months if you're wanting to bring in some livestock, of 30 days on the host farm from which they're coming. Why? Because that's what EU rules, to which we have been left serf-like, subject to, insist upon. And take something like sheep farming. You need constantly to be improving the genetic line. You need to bring in new rams. But to bring in a new ram from Scotland or Wales, which would be our traditional sourcing, is now impossible because of these quarantine rules. And that needs to be addressed. And we also have other dimensions in reference to the fact that there are stranded on this side of the Irish Sea hundreds of cattle and livestock since last year because they cannot be moved to Northern Ireland because of EU rules about blue tongue. And yet we have the ludicrous situation that if you buy a ram in France, or if you buy cattle in Sweden or anywhere else, you can bring them through GB straight to Northern Ireland, but if you buy them in GB, you cannot bring them to Northern Ireland because GB is said to be a blue tongue zone. Even though you're buying them from Scotland in many cases, which has no blue tongue difficulties, you still can't bring them. Why? Because, again, of the absurdity that we are subject to EU rules. And this House, far outside the framework of farming issues, needs to get hold of the fact that unless and until we deal with the constitutional imperative of restoring Northern Ireland to the rules of this House and of this country, not of a foreign jurisdiction, then we're going to have these multiple problems. And they but manifest themselves in the way I've described in our farming industry. So it's a multifaceted problem, but a multifaceted problem with very deep issues that need to be addressed. The last government had no appetite to address them. In fact, they deepened the problems with their Windsor framework. I trust this government, who has inherited this ludicrous situation of Northern Ireland being a condominium ruled in part by laws made in the United Kingdom and ruled in part by foreign laws in a foreign jurisdiction, that this government will address that issue, because we cannot go on like this. Neither our sheep farmers, nor any other farmers, nor our citizens, living in a situation, colony-like, where we're ruled by laws we don't make and can't change. Thank you.
Well done.
It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, Dr. Huck, and I thank the Honourable Member for Hexham for bringing forward this important debate. Livestock, including sheep, are a big contributor in the South West rural economy, and the sector is facing several challenges. Food production is worth more than 500 million in Somerset, and the industry provides employment for 8,500 farmers and food producers, which is the highest number of any UK county. Farming, by its very nature, cannot be responsive to change as other industries. Crops take time to grow and animals take time to rear. And this means that farmers need the certainty to be able to create long-term plans and invest in their businesses, rather than making changes on the hoof. The previous government failed to provide that stability for farmers, from U-turning on actions that take land out of food production, to the botched trade transition from the direct payments to ELMS. Their policies undermined farmers and have led to collapse in their willingness to invest in their businesses. Farmers need to be able to run their businesses with certainty. They need to know what funding is available, what standards are to be met, what support they're going to receive from the new government. Now, it's regrettable, then, that this government seems to have decided to continue in the Conservatives' footsteps by refusing to commit to the agricultural budget. With over 55,000 agri-environment agreements in place this year, a big part of the industry has been encouraged to become reliant on government payments. Now, unless the government commits to the agricultural budget, those farmers will not hear about whether these payments will continue at current rates until the spending review in the autumn, impacting on farmers' ability to plan. So it's no surprise that the National Farmers Union found that short and mid-term confidence is at its lowest level since records began in 2010. Now, Dr. Huck, I've spoken before in this place about how many farmers are leaving the industry because they haven't got the confidence to continue, and the impact that is having on their mental health. 92% of farmers under the age of 40 say that poor mental health is the biggest hidden problem farmers face today. And these pressures will likely further be compounded by yesterday's report that the government is going to slash the nature-friendly farming budget. Not only would this seriously threaten many farmers' livelihoods, but it would also result in at least 239,000 fewer hectares of nature-friendly farmland, according to research by the RSPB. The National Trust, the RSPB and Wildlife Trust warned before the election that the nature-friendly farming budget had to increase if the UK is to meet its legally binding nature and climate targets. Cutting it would be tantamount to ignoring our legal targets. Livestock play a central role in my constituency of Glastonbury and Somerton. So my constituents are particularly worried about the threat of diseases like blue tongue and Schmallenberg. Dr. Huck, as the proud owner of a small flock of non-commercial pedigree Shetland sheep, I share these concerns. The pandemic showed us that Britain is capable of being a vaccine superpower, and I'm calling on the government to once again work with industry to prevent us from experiencing an outtongue of blue tongue like we've seen in the Netherlands, in Germany and in Belgium. It is essential that DEFRA and the APHA have learned lessons from the COVID inquiry and previous inquiries into the 2001 foot and mouth outbreak, and have robust and tested traceability data processes in place to enable effective disease response. There are also some smaller, cost-free changes that would improve our ability to both trace livestock and reduce the amount of bureaucracy that farmers face. For example, although farmers can report sheep movements electronically, they also have to use paper passports with the exact same information. If we want accurate tracking, which is essential for proper biosecurity, we need to incentivise the use of digital reporting and to remove this outdated requirement. This small change would be a step in the right direction to transform livestock information services into a system that is fit for purpose and fit for the future. The previous government was woefully irresponsible for failing to protect British agriculture from Brexit and the botched trade deals. This new government must give British farmers the tools they need to seize new trade opportunities and introduce robust policies to protect them from uncompetitive imports. Now, since leaving the EU, the food and drink industry has been burdened with additional friction and cost, often paying for checks on goods that have never even taken place. It's essential that we give our farmers the ability to trade with our European neighbours with minimal need for checks by negotiating comprehensive veterinary and plant health agreements. The government should support the country's largest manufacturing sector by expediting their talks on this and improving our working relationship with our largest trading partner. Similarly, the government must ensure that sheep farmers can export breeding stock without delay by providing additional capacity for border control. We need to protect our markets from lamb and mutton from countries that have less rigorous animal welfare and environmental standards. If we don't, we risk undermining our farmers and the faith that consumers have in our meat. Now, as a Liberal Democrat, I believe there needs to be fairness throughout the supply chain. So finally, Dr. Huck, our ability to produce world-leading lamb and mutton is being constrained by a bottleneck at slaughterhouses caused by vet shortages. Shortages which the British Veterinary Association believe are worst in rural areas like Glastonbury and Somerton. Now, I'm concerned about the impact that this will have on food prices, animal welfare, on Somerset's rural economy, and on vets' mental health. Now, I've always been proud to represent the industry because we have a world-leading animal welfare system, but we need vets to maintain this. We have some of the best vets in the world, but the government needs to focus on retraining them. The UK's Chief Veterinary Officer, Dr. Christine Middlemas, said that almost half of vets are leaving the profession and they've been there for less than 4 years. We must rise to this challenge by increasing the UK's training capacity, which will require an increase in the amount of funding available per student and the introduction of a regulator. Now, we have many more Liberal Democrats MPs representing rural constituencies than ever before because rural communities know we understand them and we will always fight for them. Farmers trust us to have their backs because of our track record and our policies, which include properly funding ELMS with an additional £1 billion a year, renegotiating the Australia-New Zealand trade agreements and making the supply chain fairer by strengthening the groceries code adjudicator. So, Dr. Huck, with farmers facing new challenges, there is a huge amount of uncertainty across all agricultural sectors, including sheep. and the new government must take clear steps to support them. Thank you.
His Majesty's Loyal Opposition, Robbie Moore.
Thank you, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Dr Hook. And can I thank the Honourable Member for Hexham for securing this really important debate. He represents a beautiful constituency in a county that I know very well, having worked there for many a year, and can I welcome him to this place. But also, can I use this opportunity to welcome the Minister to his place in what I can only say is probably the best department in government. Before I start, I just want to start by thanking our farming community, not only in my constituency of Keighley and Ilkley in West Yorkshire, but indeed across the whole of the United Kingdom. We all know that they work tirelessly throughout the year in all weathers, and having lambed many a yow in a cold winter month, many a time up in Yorkshire, I know just how hard our farmers work. Now, I want to start by first echoing the comments that have been made by colleagues in this debate, highlighting just how important the sheep farming industry is. Sheep farming not only contributes 1.8 billion to our economy, but also provides high-quality food on our plates and indeed sustainable textiles on our back, or perhaps even a Northumberland tartan that has already been referenced by the Honourable Member for Hexham. Now, I support the National Sheep Association's calls to maintain, or not, if not enhance, the UK's flock. And I want to see the support and development of sheep farming, not its cutting back. So much of our natural landscape is as it is because of the hard graft of sheep farmers across our nation. And we owe it to them to keep food at the centre of what we do in this place, in the knowledge that supported food production goes hand in hand with our duties to the environment. During the previous Conservative government, I was proud to play my part in much progress in the sheep sector, both in my time on the EFRA Select Committee, but also as a government minister. We made strong progress in cracking down on livestock worrying, a blight to our farmers who have enough to deal with without having to worry about inconsiderate dog owners. And I only hope that the new administration will be picking up that legislation where it was left off, not scrapping it as already been reported in the farming press. We also delivered the biggest change on how the government works with farmers in a generation, following our exit from the European Union. The work to replace the Common Agricultural Policy with a framework that works for farmers, food producers and the country has been a huge task. And whilst I would be the first to accept that the Sustainable Farming Incentive and other schemes are not perfect, they are major milestones in being able to deliver a farming subsidy support scheme that works for sheep farmers and other farmers across the country as the BPS, or the Basic Payment Scheme, is phased out. And I was pleased to see at the National Sheep Association's Sheep Event 2024 that the Minister indicated that these schemes would not be overturned by the new administration. However, it is now being widely reported in the media that the Labour administration is intent on cutting the farming budget, which will not only have dire consequences for the farming industry, but also negatively impact our nation's food security agenda and efforts to enhance the environment. So could the Minister confirm that this is or is not the case, and provide some clarity around his intentions on the farming budget? Because what I am advocating is that the farming budget needs to at least be maintained, if not enhanced, and be properly ring-fenced and secured, so that provides certainty for our farming community. The harsh climate of our upland farmland will always be a challenge for any business in the area. But that is why we must support our sheep farming sector, who are able to turn land which would otherwise be uneconomical into productive land that contributes valuable produce to the economy. So I would urge the government to ensure that the new expanded offer for sustainable farming incentive is quickly rolled out, and that much clarity and reassurance is provided through the extended offers that was previously announced. Now, I know from my time in government that the DEFRA team and their officials have been working incredibly hard on this, and I would like to thank the officials, including Janet Hughes, who has a huge amount of respect from the farming community. But what we all want to see is that reassurance and clarity provided on those extended offers so that they can be taken up at full. But with a new government, we must look to the future and how we can further support this dynamic and ever-changing sector. As a guiding principle, I urge the new Labour government to trust the excellent sheep farmers across the country and who know so much about what they are doing and their best intentions. They are keen to get on with the job, and we have a duty to support them without burdening them with unreasonable levels of red tape. A clear example of this are the ongoing efforts to combat blue tongue. It is in everybody's interests to combat this disease, and I hope that the DEFRA team will be able to deliver effective support for sheep farmers, particularly with regard to proper surveillance. Now, I know that this is of deep concern to our sheep farming community, and like the National Sheep Association, I would urge British farmers to remain vigilant of the signs of blue tongue, as I am aware of around 50 suspected cases have been reported within the space of a week, and restriction zones are obviously being implemented in Essex, Suffolk and Norfolk to limit the spread of the virus. As such, will the government support the development of a licensed blue tongue vaccine and work with the industry to deploy a vaccine as soon as possible? Moving on to another area of concern, I'm also aware of the pressure within the farming sector to reduce regulation around carcass splitting. Of course, any government's first concern is quite rightly to ensure that food stocks within the UK remain safe for the broader public. But I would urge the government to look at this, and I would be interested to understand the government's view on this issue and to hear whether they would consider rolling back carcass splitting requirements so that farmers are able to maximise value. Where government really can make a direct and positive difference is in the delivery of greater fairness in our food supply chain to help sheep farmers run successful businesses. In February 2024, the industry-wide consultation provided compelling support for carcass classification, and I urge the government to pick up on this proposal as quickly as possible. It can only be right that after the hard work of raising and caring their animals, for their animals, sheep farmers should have the certainty of the price that they can expect to get from them. And it is vital, of course, that transparency is applied right across the food supply chain, as we have seen in other sectors, including for pigs and cattle. And as we look to our own domestic supply chain, we must also recognise the globalised world which we live in and opportunities and challenges that it brings. Last week, we saw the Prime Minister unveil the first step in his supposed reset with Europe. Much has been made of what this new relationship may look like, and whilst promises not to return to the single market or the customs union are welcome, it is possible under any new arrangement that farmers could fall foul of EU law. So I seek the government's reassurance of what the new relationship will look like. Complicated and bureaucratic animal welfare laws within the EU will only act to damage our sheep farming community, and I would ask the Minister to reassure me that none of the 4 nations across the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, will be subject to additional rules that we have spent much time since 2016 trying to remove ourselves from for the benefit of the sector. I don't believe I've got time, but if it's a quick intervention, I will.
The Minister says that no part of the United Kingdom should be subject to these EU rules. The reality is Northern Ireland is subject to them. That's the problem. We were never delivered from them, and his government failed to deliver us from them. And that's why we've got the mess we have.
And I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. And of course, the Windsor framework was an element of trying to address many, many concerns, of course, not only within the food and farming sector, but other sectors. And whilst it is indeed not perfect, I'm interested to see what the new government is wanting to do around that specific issue that the Honourable Gentleman raises. So to sum up, Madam Chairman, there is much to do to support our sheep farming sector. It is vital that the new government move quickly to continue the work laid down by the previous Conservative government and deliver a vision for upland and lowland sheep farming that will give businesses the ability to plan, produce and thrive.
Thank you, Dr. Hook, and it's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. It's also a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Keighley and Ilkley. I'm sure that a number of us are going to spend a lot of time in Westminster Hall debating issues in the months and years to come, and I would reflect that I thought there was always a very positive, constructive relationship, particularly between the junior ministers at DEFRA, and I'm sure that will continue into the future. And can I also welcome the Liberal Democrat spokesperson from Glastonbury and Somerton. I was also very struck that the debate covered all 4 countries of the United Kingdom, and actually I've been to all 4 countries of the United Kingdom in the last few months, to try and start that process of building a closer relationship, absolutely respecting the devolved administrations and devolution settlement, but also recognising the importance of the UK government working closely with them. But most of all, of course, I would like to thank the Honourable Member for Hexham for bringing this debate matter, raising a whole series of points of considerable importance to the sector. I thought it was an excellent introductory speech. I'm very fond of his constituency. I remember being at the Northern Farmers Conference a few years ago, and I look forward to working closely with him. We had some excellent speeches and contributions, particularly from members. On my own side, I'd very much commend the Honourable Member from North Northumberland. I thought his points about the need for new entrants were very, very well made. Long-term clarity absolutely required by the sector. A land use framework long promised, and we will be working on that with urgency. And I was very struck also by the contribution from the Honourable Member from the Western Isles. I was in Shetland recently, similar issues I suspect, but the points about crofters very well made. Absolutely, of course, respecting the role of the Scottish Government, but again reflecting the points I've already made about the role of the UK Government. The UK Government absolutely is grateful to our sheep farmers, reflecting the points made from the opposition benches. We commend them for all the work they do to provide us with the products that meet such high environmental and welfare standards and support domestic food supply chain and strong export markets. And very important role in supporting rural communities, 150,000 jobs contributing to economic growth, sheep meat production worth £1.6 billion in 2023, crucial to our food supply chains, protein-rich food, produced in often challenging environments which are not necessarily suitable for other livestock. Sheep farmers are, I'm glad to say, experiencing record high prices. Prices in June 2024 up 24.4% year on year, 42.5% higher than the 5-year average, with further benefits coming from strong export markets and new markets such as the United States opening up. Now, important points were made by a number of members about past trade deals. I think we don't need to re-rehearse some of those arguments. I think certainly from these benches we know what happened. Really important we learn those lessons from the future. And of course, some of the issues around our relationship with the European Union, very important as we go into renegotiating those. And many of the points raised, I would say, would be dealt with by negotiating a better phyto and phytofinancial agreement. And this government is very much committed to doing that. Very important to make the supply chain work more fairly, to prevent shock rises in bills by tackling energy prices through GB Energy. We want to help protect farmers from flooding through a new flood resilience task force. And we'll use the government's purchasing powers to back British produce. So overall, a new deal for farming. But the way we're going to do that is to listen closely to people on the front line. In this case, with sheep farmers and everyone who has a stake in our food and farming system. Government is doing this. We're looking at the data and we'll set out detailed plans in due course. And I was delighted to attend the National Sheep Association's 2024 event in Malvern, has already been referenced. Gave me a chance to listen, to learn, and say little to people about our plans for the future. Now, I had a number of members touching on the farming budget, the environmental land management schemes. I can reiterate yet again our full commitment to those schemes. I wouldn't believe everything that one reads in the newspapers about budgets. There's a spending review process going on, and announcements will be made in due course. But our commitment to that agricultural transition to a different form of farming is absolute. We will be trying to improve those schemes. We think that, as the Shadow Minister acknowledged, there's room for improvement, making sure they produce the right outcome for all farmers, including sheep farmers, the wider industry, ensuring food security and nature recovery in a just and equitable way. And the schemes work across the country, supporting a wide range of grassland and moorland types, including actions to support productive improved grasslands, extensive low-input grasslands and grazed priority habitats. And they include a range of actions to support arable farmers, including the management of herbal lays and winter cover crops. And they've been designed to support farmers who wish to reintroduce sheep, certainly very salient in my part of the world in the east of England, and other livestock to their arable rotation. and there are opportunities for sheep enterprises as part of sustainable farming systems to introduce livestock onto some farms that haven't seen them for more than a generation. And anyone going around the East of England will see that evidence of a different farming system in the past. Now, the expanded sustainable farming incentive also includes an improved offer, much demanded and welcomed, I hope, for upland farmers, including sheep farmers, which we hope will offer a wider range of actions and greater flexibility. I've already touched on the trade and border issue. We are absolutely determined to make sure our trade strategy will promote the highest food production standards, because the UK is a net exporter of lamb and mutton, exporting approximately a third of domestic production. Over 90% of exports go to EU destinations, and this government recognises the continuing importance of the EU as one of the sector's biggest export destinations. As I've already said, we recognise the importance of negotiating a new agreement to prevent unnecessary border checks whilst maintaining biosecurity. Now, we will also support our farmers by setting a clear target for half of all food purchased across the public sector to be locally produced or certified to higher environmental standards. Again, reference has been made by honourable members about the supply chain. We absolutely recognise fairness is important. We want farmers to get a fair price for their products, and we're committed to tackle contractual unfairness where it exists. And we'll continue to work closely with stakeholders from all sectors on how best to achieve that. Now, DEFRA, jointly with the Welsh Government, in tandem with Scottish and Northern Irish governments, have consulted industry on proposals for a new carcass classification and price reporting system, as the opposition spokesperson queried. We understand the importance of the new system to the sheep industry to provide stronger price certainty by setting out a clear, consistent and robust scheme for carcass classification and price reporting. There was a consultation, it closed in March 2024. We're now looking at this and we'll be making announcements in due course. Now, welfare and disease issues are very, very important to this government. We're alive to challenges and threats posed by lameness and diseases like blue tongue serotype 3 and peste de petit ruminant, also known as PPR. And new controls suspending personal imports of certain sheep and goat commodities, such as unpackaged meat, were announced on the 21st of August to safeguard Britain's sheep and goat populations from PPR. The Shadow Minister queried the work we're doing on blue tongue. Clearly, there were outbreaks in Norfolk 10 days, 2 weeks ago, and we're deploying the tried and tested procedures, which I'm sure he's familiar with, for animal disease control in response to the cases found in Norfolk and Suffolk. And we decided to permit use of the currently available vaccines for this virus serotype under certain circumstances. However, I'm advised that they only reduce clinical signs. They will not produce immunity from the disease, and animal keepers will need to work closely with their vets to make a decision on usage. Now, the Animal Health and Welfare Pathway is live and enables farmers with over 21 sheep registered in England to apply for funding to improve animal health and welfare. That service provides diagnostic testing for priority diseases and conditions alongside bespoke advice to improve health, welfare and biosecurity, supporting the responsible use of medicines, including antibiotics. And DEFRA also continues to work closely with sheep sector bodies on plans to enhance the statutory sheep movement reporting service over the next 18 to 24 months. Again, I think that was a question the Shadow Minister raised. Finally, Dr Huck, DEFRA supports the sheep sector through conserving valuable genetic resources to help increase sustainable food production and help breeders adapt to climate change and new diseases. DEFRA research is also exploring how genetics can help farmers increase productivity while mitigating GHG emissions. So in conclusion, I'd like to express my thanks to members for all their contributions. As I say, I'm expecting we'll be having further discussions. I have to say, my experience of Westminster Hall debates in this sector has always been a relatively small group of interested people. And I'm looking forward to building those relationships over the months and years ahead. And I'm sure we'll all learn a lot from each other. My responsibility is to provide you with answers to your questions. I'll do my very best, and I think this morning, or this afternoon rather, is the first step in that process. Overall, the government recognises the value of a thriving and productive sheep sector, and we look forward to working with you and with the sector to achieve that.
Joe Morris to wind up. A couple of minutes.
I just want to thank all the members who've taken part in the debate. It's been an incredibly valuable experience for myself, for the constituents who've been in contact with me throughout the procedure of writing my speech, throughout going through all the local agricultural shows, and it's been very heartening for me to hear the response from the Minister and the input and the collegiate tone of the discussion from all colleagues, particularly as we look towards some of the uncertainty that's been created by the cliff edge facing some farmers as payment schemes are phased out and as new payment schemes are developed. Ultimately, I will continue to be as strong an advocate as I possibly can be for the farmers across my constituency, and as I'm sure colleagues will be for farmers across their constituency. We're aware that there cannot be, these farms do not exist in vacuums. They are anchors of our community. They define who we are. They define where our constituencies, they define our constituencies' very natures, and they provide for so many people. They provide local economic anchors and first jobs, teaching young people the importance of punctuality, of timekeeping, and of hard work and resilience in many countryside environments. Overall, I think it's incredibly important that as the constituency MP for Hexham, that I continue to bring many similar debates to this place, and I look forward to continuing to do so and working with colleagues around the House to drive better outcomes, and hopefully better incomes for some of our farming communities. Thank you.
As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. I think the ayes have it. Order, order.